Hello, welcome back to the Philosophical Inquiry Show. I'm your host, Dr. Kovac. Well, as I was saying, Socrates is killed, executed by the state in 399 BC. Easier to remember, isn't it? Socrates is killed by hemlock. Uh, Plato wrote a couple more dialogues about Socrates' death, about his final hours. We won't talk about them here. But it's worth noting that after Socrates died, Plato continued to write and to think about the kinds of questions Socrates asked. Plato started to even have his own ideas about answers to the questions Socrates raised. And I want to tell you that Plato, as he continued to write and to write about his ideas, he continued to write in dialogue form, he wrote plays, and Socrates was always the main character. He started to even put his own ideas into the mouth of Socrates. So some scholars today divide Plato's writings into different periods. The early writings of Plato, which were probably more faithful representations of Socrates, and the later writings of Plato, where Plato started to put some of his own philosophical theories into Socrates' mouth. Hey, Socrates was a popular literary character. Why drop a good thing? Well, what was the question Plato was really trying to answer that he inherited from Socrates? Socrates went around asking what is justice, what is love, what is beauty, what is moral, what is right, what is good, what is dignity, all these kinds of questions. Plato eventually started to realize what you might call the general form of the Socratic question. The general form of the Socratic question is, what is it in virtue of which we can call A, B, and C by the same name, by the same word? I'll say it again. The general form of the Socratic question is, what gives us the damn right to call individual A, individual B, and individual C by the same word? Let me give you an example of what I mean using my friends, Jack and Jill. I'm not allowed to call Jill Jack. I'm not allowed to call Jack Jill. Why not? Well, because the word Jack picks out Jack, and the word Jill picks out Jill. I can't use the word Jill when I'm talking about Jack, right? They're not the same. They're different. When things are different, we use different words. Oh, no. But we use the same word for Jack and Jill. The word is human. Human, human. But wait! That's not that. That's not that. Why am I using the same word, human? Let me try to put the question a little bit differently. And you can't go on until you see this question. You've got to see the force behind this question, okay? Jill, Jack, that's hard to do with my back turned. Jack and Jill, right? When I say Jack, I'm picking out that. When I say Jill, I'm picking out that. What am I picking out when I say human? I can't be picking out that because that would ignore that. When I say Jack is a human, well, obviously Jack refers to that guy. When I say Jill is a human, Jill refers to that gal. What does Jill is human, Jack is human? What does the word human pick out? Why am I allowed to use the same name for both Jack and Jill, and you and me? Plato realized this is the question Socrates was trying to ask, not just about humans, but about everything. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. What is it in virtue of which I'm allowed to call that, and that all beautiful? Or just, when we talk about justice. You did something just and you did something just. What gives me the right to use the same word, just, for both of them? Well, let's stick with our example of humans, Jack and Jill. Why am I allowed to use the same word, human, for both Jack and Jill? What is it that makes them both humans? Not an easy question to answer, is it? What is it in virtue of, and this is going to extend to absolutely anything you can name. Okay? So don't try to tell me that Jack and Jill are both humans because they both have arms or something like that. Because then I'm just going to do the same thing with arms, okay? I'm going to ask you, what is it in virtue of which I get to call this and that, this and this, both an arm, right? So what is it in virtue of which I get to call Jack and Jill human? Assuming I'm saying something true. Assuming that when I say Jack is human and Jill is human, I'm actually describing the world as it is. I mean, the alternative is some sort of relativism, right? That's what Socrates was trying to save us from, and that's still what Plato is trying to save us from. Plato is trying to figure out how do we escape that weird dilemma between Heraclitus and Parmenides. How do we avoid sliding down into the nasty relativism of somebody like Protagoras? It can't be like Protagoras said, that I get to decide who's a human being and who isn't. That's going to be disastrous. Socrates realized that. As soon as you do what Protagoras said and said, human beings determine the truth. Human beings determine whether Jack and Jill are both humans. Oh, we don't want to go down that road. We've seen where that road gets us in some of the worst disasters of the 20th century. We must avoid that kind of relativism. How? How? This is the question Plato inherits from Socrates. And Plato comes up with a brilliant solution. Whether you accept it or not is another question, but Plato has a brilliant solution. The theory of forms. Here it is. The theory of forms states that any time you can call A and B by the same name, X, it's because they're both imitating the perfect form of X. I'll say it again. Anytime you can call individuals A and B by the same word, X, it's because A and B are both imitating the perfect form of X. If I can call Jack and Jill by the same word, human, it's because Jack and Jill are both imitating the perfect form of the human. Jack and Jill are imitating the form of the human. If you want to see what really gets Plato interested in this, just look at math. Look at math. I can tell you all the mathematical properties of circles. Well, many of them. Others can tell you even more of them. I can tell you all about how to find the area of a circle. To find the area of a circle, you simply multiply the square of the radius by pi. That's how you find the area of a circle. Well, guess what? I've never seen a perfect circle. Neither have you. Every circle you see is so imperfect that that formula, pi times radius squared, it's only ever going to get you an approximation for any circle in the world you try to measure. And guess what? We know the properties of circles despite having never found such a circle. Mathematics is not discovered. The laws of mathematics are not discovered by studying the world. There's nothing in physical reality that you can study to discover the laws of mathematics. We did not figure out the value of pi by studying various manhole covers on the street. No, we discovered the properties of circles despite having never encountered circles. So what are we studying in math? Well, Plato tells us, we're studying forms, the perfect circle, just like the perfect human, right? Just like all the circles in our actual material world are but imitations, imperfect imitations of the one real circle. The one real circle, of course, has no definite area, no definite radius. It's just the circle itself, the circle you study when you study the geometry of circles. Have you ever noticed that? You studied geometry. You know all about triangles and circles and squares and all that stuff. And then I say, which circle are you talking about? No, it doesn't work that way. You've just studied circle itself. You've studied circle itself? Wherever can I find such a circle? Is it in Ohio? Is it in California? Where is it? Well, Plato has us understand it exists in what he calls the world of forms. The world of forms is like, you might think of it as another universe or another dimension. It's a world populated only by the perfect version of each essence. What is an essence? Essence is a philosophy word. Essence refers to what a thing is, properly speaking. If I point at Mr. Whiskers, my cat, and I say, what is it? Well, there's a lot of less proper answers, like 8 pounds, like cuddly. But what's the most proper answer when I point at Mr. Whiskers and say, what is it? Kitty cat. Her essence is kitty catness. Socrates was searching for essences. Plato took that journey, the search for essences, and finally gave it a definitive answer. Sometimes historians will say Plato reified the essences. What does that mean? Reified, that's from a Latin word, rei. He thingified the essences. Just as there's the individual human, you, me, Jack, Jill, there's also another thing, the perfect human, the ideal form of the human. When you go out into the world and you look around and you see individual humans, how do you know that they're humans and not say something else, not something that just looks like a human? How? Well, Plato's answer to that is that somehow your mind has access to the world of forms. The world of forms can't be sensed, it can't be perceived with the 5 senses. The world of forms, where there's a perfect human, as well as a perfect tree, perfect flower, perfect kitty cat, perfect circle, etc., perfect justice, the important stuff that Socrates was on about. Somehow, the mind just has direct access to that world, but not the senses, not the 5 senses. The 5 senses have access to what? Material individuals, Mr. Whiskers, you and me. The argument for this, one argument for this, is quite simply this. Words in a statement, in a true statement, the words pick something out. Whenever we use the same word for multiple things, we're picking out the same thing. So if we're using the same word human for Jack, Jill, etc., the word human must be picking out the same thing. Well, what would that thing be? It must be humanity itself, the very form of a human being, the perfect human that each individual human is imitating. Sometimes Plato would use a myth, and it's almost certainly just a myth he was using to make his point. He would use a myth about this of recollection, a kind of reincarnation kind of myth. He would say, okay, before you were born, your mind was in the world of forms, contemplating the forms. Your mind saw the perfect human, the perfect cat, the perfect tree. Then you're born, and that's pretty traumatic. Boom! All of a sudden, you're overcome with all these sights and sounds and buzzing noises and people talking and change for the first time. The perfect human never changes. Suddenly, now that you're in the flesh, born in this world, you're traumatized by pain. And in that moment of trauma, it's like you forgot everything you saw in the world of forms. But then as you get older and go through life and you see people and you're able to say, hey, those are all the same. Those are all people. How did that happen? Because your mind is recalling what it saw before. It's coming back. You're saying, oh, hey, Jack, I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to imitate the form of the human. This is Plato's theory of forms. Plato's theory of forms is a theory that lets us explain the truths, how a statement can be true. Plato's theory of forms lets us explain how a number of statements can be true, like Jack is human and Jill is human. Like that's a flower and that's a flower. What's the word flower picking out in those two statements? The essence. Well, what is the essence? The essence must be the thing that the individual particulars are trying to imitate. And Plato makes arguments from mathematics. How on earth could we have ever discovered the quadratic formula? How on earth could we have discovered that the area of every circle, every real circle, every perfect circle, how could we know that its area is always the factor of the square of its radius and pi? Did we get it from studying all the circles? No, we've never studied one circle, let alone all of them, okay? You know how you learned it in math class, right? Your math teacher told you. Where'd it come from? Where'd that knowledge come from? You know where that knowledge came from? That knowledge came from somebody who was able to grasp with their mind the perfect form of the circle. How else could we have done it? How else could we have learned it? There's nothing in the world we could have studied to have gained it. Nothing. What are we even talking about when we say the area of a circle is the multiplication of pi and the square of its radius? What is that even? What are we even talking about? Manhole covers? No, those aren't perfect circles. Are we saying something true? If so, we better be talking about something. According to Plato, we're talking about circles. We're talking about the real circle. The real circle you're never going to see with your eyes or with any of your five senses. The real circle that's only in the world of forms that you gain access to mentally, intellectually. And so we can see that Plato's theory of forms lets us walk the middle ground between Parmenides and Heraclitus. Heraclitus offended the intellect when he said, everything is change. And yet, you look around and it looks like everything is changing. Parmenides offended the senses when Parmenides proposed that change is but an illusion. And yet, our minds can tell us that unless there's something stable, there's no possibility of knowledge. That's why Parmenides was offending the senses. Plato walks between the two. The material world, the universe that you perceive with your five senses, yes, subject to change, nothing but change. Every atom constantly in flux. Your five senses constantly assaulted with a changing, dynamic, fluctuating reality. But there's another reality, Plato tells us. A reality where nothing changes. The world of forms, the stable form, the stable essences of humans, of justice, of beauty, of cats, of love, you name it. That's the part Parmenides got right. The world of forms is not subject to change. That's how knowledge is possible. Oh, you want another argument for Plato's theory of forms? Here it comes. There's some knowledge. We have some knowledge which is of the unchanging, of the permanent, of the necessary. Notice those three marks characterize some of our knowledge, especially our knowledge of mathematics. Okay, the quadratic formula is permanent. It's never going away. Okay, the area of a circle, you will never find the area of a circle any other way than multiplying the square of its radius by pi. Not happening. You say, well, maybe in like 50 years we'll be able to just, maybe in 50 years we won't have to square the radius anymore. Maybe we'll be able to just use the radius, and maybe a few years after that we'll be able to get pi down to just 3. It'll make circles so much easier when you can just multiply the radius by 3. Not happening ever. It's permanent. It's necessary. It couldn't have come out some other way, right? The Milky Way solar system could not have configured itself differently such that the area of a circle comes out differently. It's necessary. It's permanent. It's unchanging. It's necessary. It's eternal. Okay? And we don't get it by studying the universe. We don't get it from studying the physical universe. But wait, how can you have knowledge of something that's necessary and unchanging when everything that we perceive in the world, absolutely everything that we perceive in the world, is contingent? Right? That's the opposite of necessary. It's contingent. It's changing. It's not permanent. It's not eternal, the way the laws of mathematics are. How is that possible? Plato, again, solves another philosophical problem about how mathematical knowledge is possible. We have knowledge that's necessary and unchanging because there's a whole reality, says Plato, that's necessary and unchanging. The world of forms, the reality of the essences, of the reified essences. That world can't be accessed with your five senses. It can only be accessed with your mind. But it's your mind's access to the world of forms that lets you have all the knowledge, all the necessary, unchanging knowledge, all that scientific knowledge you have, knowledge of the necessary and the unchanging, comes because you recall, your mind recalls what it already accessed in the world of forms. So Plato has discovered a philosophical theory that is extremely powerful. It can answer many, many philosophical questions. Questions about, throughout the history of philosophy, ever since Plato, there has been a strong Platonic tradition to this very day of people who use the Platonic model, the Platonic theory of forms. They've had to make some tweaks here and there to the theory, and you can take all kinds of advanced seminars today on contemporary Platonism, right? But to this very day, this Platonic model is invoked to solve all kinds of philosophical questions. Questions about how knowledge is possible. Questions about how mathematics is possible. Questions about what is going on in language even when I say Jack is human and Jill is human. What gives me the damn right to assert those as both true statements? According to Plato, those kinds of questions can be easily answered once you understand that there's a whole world of forms, a whole reality, a whole universe. Not a physical universe, not a material universe. It's purely intellectual. It's purely idea stuff. The ideal human, the form of the human, is not a particular height or a particular weight or a particular race, right? It's just humanity itself. Anything extrinsic to humanity, anything that's not essential to humanity, is not part of the form of the human. No. The form of the human is the essence of humanity reified. It's what the mind grasped and which the mind recalls every time it predicates or applies the term human to Jack, Jill, you, and me. The philosopher's job, according to Plato, is to understand these essences. This lecture is not the easiest one. You should watch it a second time at least. Make sure you really understand what's going on with that Socratic question. What gives me the right to use the same word, Jack and Jill? What gives me the right to use the same word, human, for both Jack and Jill, given that Jack isn't Jill, given that Jill isn't Jack? Right? You should be able to explain that question and how perplexing it is to your friends and relatives before you go on. Make sure you understand the question. Make sure you understand Plato's answer to the question. Make sure you understand how powerful Plato's answer to the question is. Plato thinks there's a perfect form of beauty. It's not a beautiful painting. It's not a beautiful symphony. It's just beauty itself. And anytime your senses, your five senses, encounter beauty, your mind, your intellect says, hey, beauty. I've accessed this before. Of course, what I accessed before wasn't a beautiful painting. It wasn't a beautiful symphony. What I accessed before was beauty itself. But I can see that this painting or this symphony is trying to imitate beauty itself, in addition to also imitating painting itself. Plato, in fact, gives us a theory, the theory of forms, which lets us explain how language works, how all the terms that we use in language work. We can understand all the terms of language in light of reified essences, thingified essences. And we can see all the many arguments Plato is stumbling on that seem to confirm his theory, like the reality of mathematics. It's very difficult to explain how mathematical knowledge is possible. Knowledge of these permanent, unchanging things like circles and triangles, which don't exist anywhere in our universe, and yet which we have absolutely certain knowledge of. Isn't it amazing that the principle for the formula for calculating the area of a circle has never been tweaked, never been modified? I'm not even sure how you would challenge it. What would that mean to challenge it? I mean, imagine if you went to grad school for math and you said, you know what? I'm about to make the biggest discovery in the history of mathematics. Pi is actually 2.9. No, that's not happening. What we discover in mathematics is permanent, necessary, and it's unfixable, right? We have certain knowledge of it. Where does certainty come from? Where could that certainty come from when it does not come from the senses, when it does not come from anything that anyone ever in history has seen, perceived, touched, heard, feel, right? The laws of mathematics were discovered purely intellectually, purely by the mind. How? How did that happen? Plato's theory, again, gives us a way of explaining how that happens. How is it that we can assert with such confidence that that's a human and that's a human, that that's a human and that's a human, even though they're different heights, different weights, their skin's a different color, they might be different genders? How can we have the certainty that they're both humans? Plato, again, gives us an answer. We can be certain because if we look at what our minds have accessed, if we look at the essences that our intellects have already grasped, we find we already know what a human is. When our senses encounter another human being, our intellect jumps into action and says, that's a human being. So take some time to understand Plato's theory of forms. If you're not understanding it, put a question down in the comments. Come see me in office hours. It's a really cool theory. Not everyone buys it. Plato's own student Aristotle seemed to have had a problem with it. We're going to get to that. But it is a powerful theory, one of the most powerful theories in the entire history of humanity. It's so powerful because it can answer so many fundamental questions. See how many questions you might be able to answer with it.